Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show. We're live from our Kingdom Financial Group studio here at 5th and State. Also live on YouTube and Facebook, having the crucial conversations that Erie needs. And on this Friday, we want to welcome back author Justin Dombrowski. He is the author of the brand new book, The Murder of Debbie Gama. Justin, welcome back to the show. I appreciate it, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Alrighty, what's the subtitle of this? It says Justice and Absolution in Erie. Unpack that subtitle for me.
Yeah, so the subtitle really, it's kind of twofold. It's justice, which focuses on the case itself, and then the absolution part, which anybody who knows the case, it focuses on Debbie's mother and her journey of forgiveness, which was really, a surprising angle of it.
And this is all in recent times, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. The case itself happened in August 1975, which is 50 years this year. So.
Wow. All right. So, again, this case preceded your being even born. What got you interested in investigating the Debbie Gama murder?
Sure. So, first and foremost, I've done several titles based on historical true crime here in Erie. So, besides that, it was after I did my fourth book, which is Erie's Great Mausoleum Mystery. My editor was looking for a new topic. We went back and forth on some suggestions, and he suggested, why don't we do something a little bit more recent? Kicked around a few ideas, and if I were to ask anybody the top 5 cases I should write about, this was at least, I'd say, in the top 2.
Is that right? What was the other one?
Yeah. Well, the other one was everybody wants to do the pizza bomber case, but that's...
Yeah, it's kind of
it's overdone a little bit, so...
Yeah. But Debbie Gama, number 2 to the pizza bomber. Wow.
Yeah.
What is it about this murder of this young girl in the mid-'70s? And it kind of seemed like some of this stuff was happening all the time anyway. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't say it sounds like I'm diminishing it, but like there were missing people. We didn't have the milk cartons until that time, and all. It was like coming to a head here. I wonder what is it about this particular case that seemed to make it rise to the top?
Well, I think there's several different factors. The one being is, I think it involves every parent's worst nightmare, which is Absolutely. Something happening to your child. The second is that it happened to involve, as those who know the case, her school teacher, and which unfortunately 50 years later we still deal with this in the news. It's like every few weeks you see a teacher who had an inappropriate relationship with a student. Sometimes it gets really violent. Other times, they get caught in time. So I think there's those factors, and there's really a lot of things to unpack with this story where everybody, I think, at least in this city, Erie's always been one of those cities where when a crime like this hits close to home, everybody seems to have either a connection to it or they relate to it in some way.
So tell us a little bit about Debbie. How did she grow up? What was her family life? Where did she go to school and all that?
Sure. So she grew up here in Erie. She had several siblings. At the time of her disappearance and murder, she lived with her mother, Betty, and her husband, Norm Ferguson, who was Debbie's stepfather. Her parents had divorced previously. Pretty amicable relationship for the most part between the divorced parents. There's really nothing that's really outwardly in terms of her life beforehand.
City folk, east side, west side?
I'd say west side over by Strong Vincent.
Okay.
And she was going into her senior year at Strong Vincent High School in the summer of 75. That fall, she would have been a senior. Nothing really stands out in terms of what Debbie was like other than that she was your typical teenage girl, 1975. She had a strong penchant for life. She loved her friends. She loved her family. There's nothing really out of the ordinary that, despite what some rumors online say, that contributed to her.
Was she like a knockout? Was she one of the prettiest girls at Strong Vincent?
I would say she wasn't. She never really at least looking at information and what we have from those who knew her, she wasn't really part of the popular clique. She kind of hung out with her own crowd. But, she was part of the twirling group with Strong Vincent. She knew people knew her. She wasn't, like I said, she wasn't somebody who stood out, like some of the popular kids. She kind of did her own thing. And
push back on me, because that typical narrative is, the prom queen that is stalked, and I mean, that's that Hollywood version.
Right.
Not necessarily this case, you would say.
Not this case, no. I mean, and it was something that, and this is a problem. This was, well, to kind of backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the reasons in writing the book is that this case has had a lot of twists and turns over the years. We won't have enough time, obviously, to go into it all. But, a lot of people have this supposition that Debbie was a wild child, that she contributed to what happened to her, which couldn't be further from the truth. If you ask a lot of people from the 70s and that, it was normal for parents to let you out. Hey, when the streetlights are on, you come home. As you get older, your parents gave you a little bit more trust in things. And, Debbie had a close relationship with her mother. She had a very select few that she was close with. She wasn't, out doing excessive dating and things that adults would be doing. So it really kind of, at least when you talk from the criminal investigation aspect as far as the victimology, she's not like, for example, if you get a serial killer who finds a prostitute, somebody who puts himself in that environment was completely out of the ordinary.
Does she have a boyfriend? Who did she take to prom junior year? All that.
So in regards to that, I mean, Debbie did, again, and it kind of goes back to the same thing. Debbie dated boys at the time.
Yeah.
There was some instances where she dated men who were older by a few years, but it was nothing really out of the ordinary where you could sit there and pinpoint, hey, this had something that contributed to it.
All right. So, we're talking to Justin Dombrowski. Talk about the circumstances leading up to her disappearance. What was going on that day?
So, well, what was going on that day? I believe it was Friday, August 8th, 1975. The last person besides her younger 10-year-old sister to see her alive was her stepfather, who left the house that morning. Her younger sister actually observed her in the mirror. She made a comment to her younger sister that she was going to the beach with her friends that day, which was not out of the ordinary. The only other thing that happened is there was a phone call that morning. Debbie's sister mentioned that there was a man or a male voice on the phone. We don't know the extent of that conversation. After that, sometime between, I'd say after 7:30, she left the house and she was never seen again.
7:30 in the morning?
7:30 in the morning.
Wow.
So what would normally happen is when she would go to the beach with her friends, they would sometimes walk. I believe some of the records stated that sometimes they would either hitch a ride or take a bus. But, I mean, being that close over by Strong Vincent, you're not really, back then you walked everywhere you went.
Sure.
So it wasn't really out of the ordinary. But the one thing that really kind of helps lays out everything is that whole week before she disappeared, her and her family had just came back from a trip in Florida. So what she was doing and who she was with is well documented. And, we know that for a fact, at least. So when people say, well, Debbie may have had a boyfriend or a romantic rendezvous, there wasn't really much room for anything like that to happen. And it was really out of character for Debbie's personality and the type of girl that she was. So up until that morning, nothing really stands out in terms of an event that would have preceded it, anything that would have led us to say, well, this is what happened. And then when she leaves the house at 7:30, she's never seen again.
And the girlfriends didn't see her?
No.
None of her beach mates that would... Oh, my gosh, that's shocking.
Yeah.
Wow. So, okay, when do they start becoming alarmed? Like what? I mean, I don't know what the laws were back in the 70s. Did you have to wait 48 hours for a missing person report?
See, the thing is with that is sometimes it depends on the jurisdiction. I mean, back then things were a little bit different. Sometimes you would have police departments that would have more of a lax attitude where they say, well, they're just children. They'll eventually come back. And most of the time, statistics, whenever you have a missing child or individual, they're usually located within 24 hours. This type of situation, her mother didn't really start to worry for the first night because although Debbie sometimes hung out late at night, she still, again, did the occasional thing where a teenager might have forgot to say, Mom, I'm going here with so-and-so.
There's no cell phones.
No cell phones, no social media, nothing else really. So it really was a few days into that weekend where Betty Ferguson, her mother, and her stepdad, Norm Ferguson, started to become alarmed. And in one instance, they actually did come downtown here to the police station, and they brought a photograph of her, and they were concerned, but the police refused to do a missing persons report. They wouldn't even take the photo.
Wow.
And, Debbie's mom and stepfather, I mean, they tried to look throughout the city. And then Debbie's father was eventually told that she was missing. He also went out and tried to look for her, and nobody was able to locate her. Unreal.
I'm talking to Justin Dombrowski. Let's get our first break in here. 4:17, it's Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show. The new book is called The Murder of Debbie Gama, Justice and Absolution in Erie by Justin here. Stay with us. Really one of the most horrific murders in the history of Erie, the murder of Debbie Gama. And Justin Dombrowski has written the historical true crime book about this here. And Justin, let's talk about where you can find this book. I would imagine all the local booksellers, right?
Right. Yeah, you can purchase it online. Amazon, your big box retailers. I know some of the CVSs here are starting to carry.
CVS, wow.
Yeah, they carry it. But Warner Books, Press, Barnes & Noble, if you're out near Northeast, Tia Bookseller also carries it. And but this title, they're actually doing it a little bit more nationwide rather than just locally restricted. So
Wow. Okay. So where we left off is that the parents were looking, both Debbie's mom and her stepdad, and also Debbie's dad, and they could not find her until when?
So they didn't really, they don't really come into the picture with finding her per se, but it occurs a few days later, around the 13th of August, down near Cusawago Creek, which is outside of Meadville. A body is located in the creek underneath a bridge there. And it's eventually reported on by newspapers here, by both the Daily Times and the Morning News. Debbie's mother, Betty, saw an article about it, and there were some similarities, and others within the family started to see that as well. And originally that started out as, well, maybe you should call and at least rule it out. And eventually what happened is within a few days they were able to confirm that the clothing was hers, and they did identify her body as being Debbie.
Isn't that interesting to you here in 2025 that there was no like missing persons database that the state troopers or the Mill Creek Police could have went to say, okay, we have this dead body. Is there anybody missing?
Right. Well, they still had resources even back in the 70s with different teletypes and that, where they would still send things out. Now, the one thing is when the body was reported to have been found, at least based off of the condition and other details, they did not report that it was a body of what appeared to be a teenage girl, but of a young woman. So there was a little bit of I don't want to say a typo, but there was a little bit of a mix-up with information there. But, we're talking 50 years ago, and this really gives you an idea how far things have come, where all these databases and such just didn't exist. You normally would have police jurisdictions that really didn't communicate as much as they do now, and it really hampers a lot of information from back then.
All right. What was I hesitate to be graphic. It's we're on the radio, but what was the condition of her body? Was she abused?
Well, there was no. The only thing is that when she was found, she had wire wrapped around her neck. She had thin welding wire around her wrists and ankles, and no visible signs of trauma. Obviously, a body that a few days into that shows a little bit of sign of decomposition, so that was the extent of it.
I would imagine that the welding wire was an instant clue, huh?
It was a very unique type of welding wire that was not commonly found, so that was immediately noted by the police. And it really kind of also, they were able to confirm that the wire was likely used in her death as well.
Wow. All righty. So the parents go to Meadville, to the Meadville morgue to do an identification, or how'd that work out?
Visual identification was not possible.
Oh, was it?
It was identified, I believe, by her clothing. But they also used dental records. I don't know if they used dental records per se, but her teeth were in such condition for her age where they were also able to use that to kind of identify it. But they did not do a visual identification. As far as I'm aware, her stepfather was told about it, and then her friend, one of her close friends, identified the clothing. So,
can you talk about the coroner's report? Again, this would have been the Crawford County coroner, right?
Yeah, there's nothing that really stands out too much, other than the fact that there was no drugs, no alcohol.
Okay.
Nothing that really would give you kind of a clue as to what happened, other than that death was ruled due to strangulation. So.
Okay, strangulation. That must have been at that point that it started screaming across the headlines in the local papers, right?
Kind of, but it didn't really catch on here until the end of the week once they confirmed the identity, and then they really started to kind of branch out from there.
Had the paper picked up on a missing person at all, or not really?
No. And that really also more so is because there was not a missing person report filed.
Sure.
And it was a few days after Debbie had been identified that, they had reports, she may have been on her way to Florida, just a bunch of bogus stuff that was just not true. Mm-hmm. But really, the investigation then starts with the Pennsylvania State Police taking over. And, they, contact her friends, relatives, and it's like almost immediately they just hit a brick wall, kind of. So.
What do you mean by that? That just no leads?
No leads. They don't know where and it's even until this day, we don't know, nobody knows what happened once it was after 7:30, 8 o'clock that morning. Those particulars are likely never to be known. But there was no place. There was at least, I think there was one or two possible sightings, but those were not credible just because some of the details were off. So it's like she just vanished. There was no indication that somebody said, hey, I may have seen her here, and it was a confirmed sighting. They had no, at least the state police stated they didn't have any viable suspects that they could pinpoint and saying, oh, we know she was with this person or that person. And it was like almost immediately they were just stymied by the whole investigation.
Wow. All right. I got a few minutes here. Let's talk about what the first breakthrough was on the case. I mean,
Sure.
I would imagine major crimes unit of the state police was on this, right? I mean, it became a high priority, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, cases of that nature usually, take several investigators, but it really wasn't a breakthrough that was with the state police. It was when Daniel Barber, a local private investigator, was hired by the family after Thanksgiving. Once he started looking to the case, he pretty quickly started to develop a suspect and information that had led him to believe who the state police should be looking to as responsible for Debbie's death.
Okay, well, that begs the question, how is he able to, bring up some different angles that the state investigators were not able to make,
Well, there's several different factors that come into it. I won't go into too much, but it was more at the time the police felt that Debbie's stepfather was a suspect, although there was no evidence whatsoever that suggested it.
So they kind of got locked on this person over here.
Right. And then there was numerous instances where Dan Barber had details about who he suspected, and even on one instance, the state police just refused to take any information from him. And it would take quite some time for him to be able to have them look at the evidence he obtained. And, it was one of the more, I would think, frustrating parts of the case, and he even acknowledged the same thing, is because as far as he was concerned, I mean, I know Dan pretty well. He's a pretty seasoned investigator. He had a history with the U.S. Army CID investigating cases, including prior homicides, so it wasn't like he was a random person on the street. He knew what he was doing, and it was just like the state police's inability to want to look outside the box as to who was responsible.
Let's talk about the psychology of this whole thing, because obviously Dan was like thinking, who's in Debbie's life that would have kind of that love-hate relationship, right? Is that what I mean? I don't want to psychoanalyze it, but
Right.
Is there any truth to something like that, or?
Sometimes there is. I mean, the basic principle is, at least when it comes to homicide investigations, is that stranger murders are very rare. We get all hooked up in all these serial killers and that, and we think it's really prominent, when at the end of the day, such situations and crimes are very rare. You're more than likely to be murdered or killed by somebody you know or are related to or have some kind of affiliation. So there's always that aspect that, was it somebody that Debbie knew, or was it a complete stranger murder, which could not have been ruled out? So I would think the psychology behind it is, at least from Dan's perspective, is he went into it from the same angle that the state police and also the city police who were assisting investigated it. Was it friends, relatives, and he was able to pretty much disassociate that none of them had anything to do with it. It was only once he started to hone in on who he felt it was that it made sense.
Justin Dombrowski is with us here. The Murder of Debbie Gama, his brand new book. Back after this. Talk Erie on the Joel Natale Show. We're live from our Kingdom Financial Group studio here at 5th and State, also live on Facebook and YouTube. We're talking to Justin Dombrowski. He is the author of the new book, The Murder of Debbie Gama, and the subtitle, Justice and Absolution in Erie. And Justin, let's pick up the trail, if you will. And the private investigator, Daniel Barber, again, famous for this case, really. I think this might have been his signature case, right?
Well, it was one of his first big cases. He had been doing some work prior to this, some smaller cases, but it really was, I think, the case that put him and his work on the map, so to speak.
So at what point then... So Daniel kind of pinpointed Raymond Payne early, would you say?
I would say within a month he had a supposition that Raymond Payne was involved to some extent. And Payne, just kind of backtrack, was Debbie's English teacher.
Okay, at Strong Vincent.
Right.
An English teacher. And was that a particularly... did she like that subject? I mean, was there kind of a connection there? The connection
really was is Payne at the time was the type of teacher who didn't adhere to the typical social norms of the period that other teachers did. He was often dressed sloppily. If you wanted to duck out of a class and just go hang out somewhere, you could do it in his class. If you wanted to smoke in his class, he didn't care. He swore. He didn't do things that regular teachers do. A lot of stuff that even still by today's standards would probably be frowned upon. So he was a type of teacher that tried to be more friendly and personable with the students. So, and that really had more of a mixed reaction. You had some people some kids who were creeped out by him, and some thought he was the cool teacher that you could relate with. So,
did he have any kind of reputation, either by colleagues or by students, of kind of being a womanizer or kind of catering to the girls?
He would make sexually suggestive comments to the female students, and he would act inappropriately. That was just abhorrent. And it was known, but not widely discussed, between some of the teachers and his actions. And he really had a personality that followed him that just was not good. That, it would alarm you, I would think, really? as a parent.
And again, back then, teachers kind of were given up, well, that's just Mr. Payne, right?
Yeah, some people discounted him, others didn't. It really is kind of different, because we know that Payne was fired from another school district prior to working at Strong Vincent. But this kind of goes back to a practice that Dan Barber constitutes as what we call passing the trash. So pretty much it's somebody else's problem. And it was something that back then, and even until today's standards, still happens, where rather than handle the problem accordingly and appropriately, you let them, pretty much what they did is they let him finish out his term as a teacher. They'd write pretty much a letter of recommendation, if anything, and then it's somebody else's problem. But in this instance, the issue was when the City of Erie School District hired Payne to teach at again after he left Girard School District. Girard School District later had said that nobody had asked for credentials, nobody had asked why he had been fired, and that's even problematic in today's terms.
Yeah, and again, FBI checks, Act 47, whatever it is, didn't exist, right?
Stuff like that back then. I mean, you don't have a lot of these databases cross-referencing and checking each other, and even this is, I wouldn't say it's more fascinating, but it's a more troubling aspect, is even until the 2000s, and even until recently, there's still avenues where some of these predatory teachers or other individuals will still slip through the cracks, and they're not held accountable.
All right. So when did Payne become a person of interest? When did it jump from the private investigator to official law enforcement?
Sure. So what really jump-started that is Dan Barber had an excellent working relationship with one of the assistant district attorneys down in Crawford County out of Meadville. After he kept getting stonewalled by the state police, he went to him and said, look, here's all the evidence I have. Nobody is listening to me. And, he pretty much asked for assistance. And it was then when the assistant DA's office or the DA's office down there looked at it, they said, we think you have some pretty solid, information here. And they kind of had a come to Jesus moment with the state police investigators and said, look, you need to at least talk to him. So that's when at least Sergeant John Loftus, who was handling the investigation, him and John Martin, who was one of the detectives, met with Barber, went over all the information. Then once the state police takes over, it's their case. He was hired to find who he felt was responsible, which he did. And, once Sergeant Loftus and his team took it over, they pretty much saw it from there.
Did EPD play a role at all?
They played a minor role, just because when Debbie's body was found in Crawford County, still nobody knew where the actual crime was committed.
Okay.
Today, everybody's still a little bit murky about where it occurred, but there's some pretty, I would say, solid theories. But the reason why they were involved was because she disappeared after leaving her home. She could have, but some of the detectives with the city police did at least help out, at least with some of the initial investigation.
Has there ever been a timeline of that day ever created there, Justin?
To my understanding...
did Ray ever cough it up?
No. He eventually did provide a confession, but by today's standards, a confession is not worth the paper it's on. Wow. It's not anything and any idea as to what really transpired he took with him to his grave when he died from COVID.
Wow, that's what he died of. Okay, so take us into the charging instrument. How did that all come about? How long after the murder was he charged? So
it was about a little over a year after Debbie died. He was charged originally by authorities in Crawford County because his confession stated that the body was found in Crawford County, but in his confession he claimed that he had murdered her in Waterford. So that set up a little bit of a legal tussle between Erie County and Crawford County, trying to determine who would handle the case.
You mean on the coroner side or which side?
Well,
because you have the Pennsylvania State Police, right?
Right. And what it comes down to is wherever the crime occurred of homicide is where the case would be heard. So if Payne's claiming, hey, it was in Erie County and not Crawford, then the case would legally need to be moved back here to Erie.
And the Erie County DA would prosecute.
Right. And Michael Palmisano, who recently passed away, former judge, he was the prosecutor. I know Shad Connolly was on that as well. They were tasked with trying it for the prosecution. But in today's standards, at least from what is known about the case, it's believed that he probably committed the crime actually at his property in Cambridge Springs, just across the county line.
Is that right? Wow. All right. So they charged him. What was it? First degree?
Wasn't first degree, right? Well, he eventually was charged with, trying to think. I believe it was first degree. I know that's what he was convicted on.
Okay.
And the thing is at the time of his trial, after he pled guilty, there was a degree of guilt hearing, which is held between judges at the time. And the premise was that first degree at least would have at least carried a life imprisonment. Any of the lesser degrees, you would have had a chance of getting out. So
okay, they
at least still had to do a little bit of work to present it before the judges to say, hey, he needs to be in prison for the rest of his life.
So was this a big trial or was it not? I mean, when did he confess? I mean,
so he had his confession in September of 76. And then when he did go to trial, which would have been the following year, they were, of course, planning for a trial, but he eventually had, agreed to pleading guilty. So that kind of takes the whole trial aspect away, but it didn't really take away the degree of guilt hearing, which still needed to determine how he would have been penalized.
And so that was when all the evidence was displayed to the judges, right? Not to a jury.
So the fact of the matter,
a jury never saw this case,
right? So the jury actually was about to be picked when he
confessed.
Yeah, when he pled guilty.
Oh, when he pled, yeah.
But the thing is, when it goes in front of the degree of guilt hearing, like it did, you're not really presenting evidence per se about the guilt because the party's admitting their guilt.
Yeah.
You're presenting evidence for the degree of the punishment. Okay. So that was the evidence that was provided. So of course they had the coroner, they had the autopsy report that was entered into evidence. They had, photographs that they would have showed.
Did they go to motive?
They believe, well, it depends on who you spoke with. Obviously the defense angle was that Raymond Pate had problems. It was an accident. He didn't mean to kill her. Whereas the prosecution, the way that they approached the angle was it was intentional. They didn't, and it's really kind of foggy because throughout this whole process, there's not a lot of seriousness that backs up the confession to begin with. So
that is interesting. So it goes through this trial. He gets basically he's guilty of first degree murder. Mm-hmm. Was it life imprisonment?
Right.
No parole.
No parole.
Okay. And then and that happens in 77?
Yeah.
Okay. Then what? Because again, I've been hearing about this case. Sure. I mean, I was a teenager in 77, but I've been hearing about this my entire adult life.
Sure. So from there, and at least as far as the book really takes off, is, it focuses on Debbie's mother and her journey of at least being able to cope with her daughter's death. And for me, that was important to focus on because books and stories like this shouldn't just focus on the gruesome, sensational aspect. It needs to focus on the individuals who had to deal with it and live with the story and still do. So it was important to focus on what she went through also because even in today's standard, we see, grants and other, finances for public support groups and that are constantly being cut all around the country. Mm-hmm. So back then, even we're talking 50 years ago, families of homicide victims did not have many resources to cope. Wow. And that was something that Betty had a lot of trouble dealing with, and she was very open about it. And it was something that I felt was a powerful story because a lot of people go through what she went through and don't have anybody to talk to. They don't have counseling. They don't have the resources that they should have. So her journey eventually transitioned into forgiving Ray Payne, who at the time had been trying to file appeal after appeal. And
what was he appealing? What was the case?
He appealed. There was a litany of reasons why he was arguing to get out. As he, I could probably sit here and give you a list of them.
Yeah.
But as it gets towards around into the 1990s, late 1990s, around the year 2000 into the 2000s.
20 years later.
Yeah, he's starting to say that, he was improperly sentenced, that it's not his DNA on Debbie's body, that he wasn't. And he focused on the aspect that part of his punishment, the severe punishment, was because he supposedly, because at the time when Debbie's body was found, there was DNA found on her that indicated she was sexually assaulted. And he was saying, it's not my DNA. And if it's not my DNA, if I can prove it, then I should have a new hearing on my sentencing. And, Betty had went through this whole process of forgiveness. And by that time she had done, work in the community, working with like the Crime Victim Center and all these different other families. And it really kind of went into a whole new direction that nobody expected.
And so we're talking that she basically, before Ray's death, totally forgave him and became an advocate for him. Is that accurate?
Well, I wouldn't say she became an advocate for him. It was quite some time before he died, but she eventually came to terms that she had to do what she needed to move on for herself. I mean, we sit here and we think, if somebody hurt my child, I'd probably kill the guy, or something along those lines, you know. But we get lost in the moment of the message that it isn't for us to judge what we believe forgiveness is, because you may interpret it different than I do. And for Betty, for her to move on and cope and heal and to help others, her path was forgiveness. And that's what needs to be remembered the most. So she didn't become an advocate for him, per se, because normally when the case would be carried in the papers, everybody would rush and say, what do you think? And she goes, I trust what the law says. And, you know, Betty was an advocate also for saying, hey, I want to know whose DNA is on it. Because if it's not Ray Payne's, somebody needs to be held accountable.
And they never did that DNA analysis, did they?
Well, they at least, up until a few years ago, actually, they did do the DNA analysis, and they did determine it was not his DNA.
They did?
They did. And because of that, he got a new degree of guilt hearing. And, you know, that focused on, you know, a lot of people were having to come to terms with the fact of, wow, he could actually get out. Because if they had to resentence him by the 1970s guidelines, you know, he could be back on the street.
Wow.
So,
and all these court hearings and things happened in Crawford then?
No, so
they happened in Erie?
once the case was transferred to Erie,
okay,
all this happened out of Erie County.
So Erie DAs, Erie judges. Who was the main presiding judge for this?
So at least as far as the rehearing goes, I know it went before Judge Braybender.
Okay.
So
gotcha. Yeah. It's remarkable stuff. In just a kind of the minute or two that we have left with you, Justin, what would you want folks to take away with from your book?
I would say the things that stand out the most is that with this horrible crime, it's not a story about Raymond Payne that needs to be remembered. It's about Debbie, and that her memory is, you know, even online in today's day of social media, where we see people often rushing to perform character assassination, that should not be done in her case. You know, Debbie was a young, beautiful, vivacious girl that loved life. She loved her friends and family. You know, she happened to just be the victim of a horrible tragedy. And I think, you know, she needs to be remembered for who she was. And that's one of the things that stand out the most is when you talk about this case, 9 times out of 10, you'll get people who say, I remember her, or I knew somebody who knew her, and instantly they start telling stories about her. And that's how it should be. Yeah. You know, she should not be remembered for the crime that befell her. And then most of all is the journey that her mother went on and the work her mother did in the community to help other families.
I think a third story would be just to remark about how better we are. Let's hope that we're getting better on the vetting of our teachers and the, you know, of tightening up all those things, right? I mean,
well, it's never going to be perfect.
No,
as much as we want it to be, but the one thing is for sure is all the safeguards and laws that were in place at that time failed Debbie, and they failed a lot of other people. And amazing. You know, when they say history repeats itself, like I said, we still see other examples of it consistently pop up, and we should be doing better, you know, as a community in preventing that from happening.
What's your takeaway? Are you glad you dug into this case?
I am. It was a very sensitive topic, and still is amongst a lot of people here in Erie. So it's really one of the things where you really don't know how it's going to go. Yeah. And it was kind of keeping you on the edge of your seat. Once, you know, I had discussed with Debbie's sister about what the book would be about, and once it was written and, you know, she had a positive reaction to it, I kind of relax a little bit, you know, temperature comes down, but you're always going to, it's a toss up with something like this because people are going to react in different ways.
Justin Dombrowski, he is the author of The Murder of Debbie Gama, the Justice and Absolution in Erie, at your local bookstore. This historic true crime book about our own community. Thank you so much, Justin, for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
You got it. It is 4:55.